Are you a neurodivergent parent? Or maybe you have a child who's been diagnosed as being neurodivergent. Or maybe you're like me and less familiar with the term neurodiversity. You've heard the word thrown around many times, but because it hasn't been part of your life, you might not have paid attention to it or its meaning. Either way, today's episode is for you because we all need to learn about understanding everyone. As the diagnosis of neurodiversity rises, so does the wealth of knowledge and information available to better understand and acknowledge that people naturally think differently due to variations in brain functioning and wiring. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today we're joined by Sam Young. Sam is a growth-minded two-time Fulbright scholar and director of Young Scholars Academy, a strength-based, talent-focused virtual enrichment centre that supports twice exceptional students and their families. He's a neurodivergent educator who has ADHD. As an ADHD learner, he has tremendous understanding of and experience in and respect for all things related to neurodiverse education. Before founding Young Scholars Academy, Sam taught in a variety of capacities, including nearly a decade at Bridges Academy, at an array of programs in the US, Europe and Asia. He's led twice exceptional students to over 7 countries for immersive cultural and educational trips. Sam's insights have been featured in the documentary 2E, Teaching the Twice Exceptional, the textbook Understanding the Social and Emotional Lives of Gifted Students, 2nd edition, as well as in Variations magazine, 2E News and other publications. I am thrilled to have Sam here today to share his expertise, experiences and insights with us. Hi Sam, welcome to Parenting and Personalities.
Thank you so much for having me, Kate.
It's a pleasure. Now, look, I understand that neurodivergent parents or parents of neurodivergent children will have an interest in this episode, but why is this also a pretty important topic of interest for people for whom the term might be very new or not an everyday term? And how can you define this term for us so that our listeners can understand as simply as possible?
Well, I think that everything in life exists along a continuum, right? And so a lot of the times we like to think that there's these binaries, it's black or white, it's night, it's day, but there's dusks and dawns and complexity. Neurodiversity is no different. The idea is that our brains exist along a continuum. This is a term that was originally coined in the autistic community, but the central thrust of it is that these are brains that diverge out to the edges of the bell curve. So this could be someone who is autistic, has ADHD, language processing struggles, dysgraphia, dyslexia. Their brain functions differently than a quote-unquote typical or neurotypical brain, and therefore they diverge from the neuronorm, hence neurodivergent.
Cool. So how do we know if we are or if our kids are neurodivergent? Because, look, I'm older, I'm 62. So back when I was younger, this wasn't exposed or looked at, and people obviously weren't as aware of it. Why are we so aware of it today? What's the different things in society, even though people say that we've come a long way in diagnosing and things like that? The symptoms weren't always there in the same way that I feel that they're around today. I don't know. Just hit me with it.
Yeah, I think a big part is awareness, right? That you only knew before the internet. You only knew those in your zip code, right? You could ride your bike there and you could get to know them. But now you have this ability to infinitely explore people and cultures and countries. And I think that what's happened is that people have tapped into communities that they were not otherwise aware of because they simply didn't exist within earshot. So going online, finding out that the way in which someone feels might be symptomatic of an umbrella diagnosis, or someone's experience feeling different or broken or unique might be part of a community. And once, humans are pretty simple, right? Like we want to move, we're quite tribal in many ways. We want to move towards pleasure, away from pain, and we want to belong and procreate. Like we're not super complex. What we do is gravitate towards more information which is shared on the internet. So many people are, I don't think it's suddenly that all of a sudden like autism is through the roof, what's going on? It's just that people who are autistic are now aware of the word, of the characteristics. They can go on social media and identify with people and maybe identify themselves. My dad, who's passed, but he was a super quirky, twice exceptional person who didn't have language, right? He was born in 1947. He was like the first wave of the baby boom. And he was an artist, struggled his whole life with organization, was incredibly impulsive, was dyslexic, had to get a typewriter to fill out forms and things like, but there just wasn't a language or a diagnosis for him to understand his brain. So what happened? You get shipped off to like military school and try to fix yourself until you can get in line. And I think that we're moving away from that, hopefully, and we're recognizing people's differences and cultivating their strengths and talents.
So when did your father recognize his differences, or did it never get recognized?
I think I recognized his differences. I mean, he always knew that he was different, and he always struggled. He'd always say, I don't know why I'm things that are hard for other people are easy for me, and vice versa. And I think that's a big assumption for a lot of people. There's like that's kind of a launch pad. It, for me as well, and I'm from a different generation, but something was different. I couldn't read books in school, but I loved chatting with people. And if I wanted to get information, I could be really personable and get it out of people. And my way of learning was just a different pathway. And kind of tried to like muscle my way into like, if I just try so hard to read, I can do it. But I think more often than not, either a parent looking down at their kiddo or a person themselves saying something feels different, I'm not having the experience from my peers, is kind of where a lot of that questioning will begin.
How did you, what age were you when you recognized all of this? Did you recognize it in yourself, or was it a parent recognizing it?
I think it was like everybody sees it.
Okay.
My teachers recommended that I be screened for in the second grade for ADHD, and definitely I think as I got older and production went up, like fourth grade as well, my teachers recommended again, and we did. And then in university again, every time there was kind of a ratcheting up, it would kind of be like, do you have it? Yep. Oh, you do. Okay. And sort of like doubling down. And I think that for a lot of families, at least here, like, I don't know the Australian education system as well, although I'm learning, there's just kind of these moments in time where production ramps up, right? It's all of a sudden, for us, it's like grade 3, grade 8. It's like those preparation years for the next step. The end of one chapter and the beginning of another, and then all of a sudden, wow, parents are getting a lot of my really bright kid who's so personable and charming is not turning in work, and teachers think they're lazy. What's going on? And we dive into it deeper. We're like, oh, it's prefrontal cortex struggles. They're having difficulties with their executive functioning, but they have these strengths, and it gets really complex.
So how where do you go when this happens? You know, what's the kind of person you see, and do you have a lot of availability in the States? I mean, our people are under the pump over here. There's so many psychologists and people who are looking at psychiatrists, etc. They're all under the pump. So, you know, is that the area that you go to when you're diagnosing something like this?
Yeah, you know, it's a tough one, right? We just had a blog recently that we wrote, which is like how valid is a self-diagnosis. And I think for some people, a diagnosis is not feasible financially, geographically, etc. And so I think starting in that place of, you know, am I feeling, operating, experiencing differently than others? A great first place to go is definitely finding online communities. There's bad information out there. Always be aware. You know, like there's lots of spaces I think that have harmful information or this kind of deficit fix-it information. So I always tell families, look for places that are highlighting strengths. I live in Los Angeles. Almost every person that I know, I am not like probably legally able to diagnose people, but it's a parlor trick, right? Almost every person that I know that's wildly successful in this space especially is for sure a twice exceptional, meaning that they have dual exceptionality. So they have an exceptional strength and some kind of struggle, a neurodivergent person. And they are there because of their brain. They saw something that nobody else saw. They had unapologetic, unabashed commitment, whatever it might be. So find, when you're looking for professionals and support, look for people who highlight strengths And a great first place after finding some kind of community support and local resources is looking for perhaps a neuropsychologist who can do some sort of assessment. And the same tip, you're looking for someone who's going to acknowledge and not try to fix, but acknowledge someone's strengths, to they highlight creativity and curiosity and so forth.
So does neurodivergency always come? So, I've been listening to podcasts and stuff like that you've done. So is a neurodivergent person, do they always have a gift and struggle on the other side? Are they always twice exceptional, or are some people just struggle? Do you get what I mean?
That's a very good. So, definition. The umbrella term would be neurodivergent, right? There's people who are differently wired, like we've talked about, people who diverge from the norm. Under that umbrella, you have, if you picture your classic bell curve, you have people who will deviate towards one end of the bell curve or the other. Neurodivergent could be autistic and highly gifted, right? That person's going to be far off to the right. You might have someone who's dyslexic and really creative, but in an aptitude intelligence test, they might test lower. So the idea behind twice exceptional is, and people will disagree about where the threshold lies and if it's okay that we test and should we test and how do you test, some of these things like interpersonal intelligence, creativity, whatever it might be. But the idea is that the person is in possession of dual exceptionalities, and typically we would define that as something that's at least one standard deviation over in both directions. So someone who maybe has an IQ, and this is, again, we're moving away from IQs, but just to kind of quantify it, someone who might be like 115 or 125 and up, and then someone who's going to maybe have some kind of areas that might be classically defined as like remedial. Maybe they're slower processing or dyslexic or dysgraphic, and there may be one or two standard deviations over in the struggle area. So what's unique about this definition is that, as I think you're getting at, Kate, quite nicely, is like it sort of pokes a hole in our idea of what is gifted or what is learning disabled, because I hope that we can all, if we take away nothing else, that we can all be detectives. You may be looking at someone who you think has learning disabilities or learning differences, and they may in fact be gifted in certain areas that you just haven't otherwise looked. I use the example all the time of like a Simone Biles, right? Simone Biles is an ADHDer. I don't know how she did in school. I did not go to school with her, but on the gymnast mat, her kinesthetic intelligence is, well, it's the best in the world, right? And there's no competition. So when you look at, if we only assessed her, if she didn't have the opportunity to develop her strengths and her interest in having this enriching environment, then she may be a subpar student who never self-actualizes. Because she's in possession of both of these, and because she was exposed to opportunities and so forth, she was able to self-actualize, and no one cares about her ability to do well in math class or read.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And I think that that's kind of like the big takeaway that I hope that we'll have, is that whether or not everybody is twice exceptional, we should be curious about everybody's strengths and support their differences.
Yeah. That's a really great point, because I do know of several people who do have children that are exactly as you're explaining right now, and their struggle is like the normal schooling side. It's so stressful because they are not there in that area, but they do have these gifts, and it's only now, like talking to you even and looking at what you were doing, is that I'm hoping that they'll be listening, because to make the most of those gifts is just the hugest thing. I was just talking to one of my friends the other day, and her son is so gifted in a certain area, but struggling at school, as you say, and there aren't many schools that handle that, in their normal mainstream education, and I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, because I don't, if you're not in this area, do you get what I mean? You don't even think about it.
Yeah, it's one of the most frustrating things, which is that, if you look at multiple intelligences, the Howard Gardner's idea that there's 8 or 9 different intelligences: mathematical, kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, logical, etc. School is looking at a fairly narrow, maybe 1/3 section of those. Not to mention, the expectations of school are unrealistic, right? Our brains develop back to front. We develop first emotionally, And then we start to have these kind of higher order things like acceptance and belonging, which is kind of like our so reptile, mammal, human was the old idea. This isn't quite popular anymore, but I like the visual of back to front development. This area, this prefrontal cortex, the part that's responsible for response inhibition and working memory and, all of the like CEO skills, right? The getting things done skills. That doesn't develop until you're 30, 27 or 30 if you're neurodivergent. So we're taking these kids and we're like, they're so smart, but they don't get their work done. Or they're so smart, but they're lazy. Or they're so smart, but they don't care about school. And well, they're smart enough to know this is just busy work. Or they're smart enough to know that they can engage at a high level, but they can't turn in the work because those skills aren't developed yet. So we need to scaffold and support those. So again, when we go more as, I always say, like if we could be more of a detective and less of a lawyer, we're not judging, we're not prosecuting, we are curious and trying to understand. I noticed that you did exceptionally well in that English report and theater, and math seems to be a struggle. What do you think the difference is? You'll probably find it's some combination of interest and the type of work that's being provided, right? So a lot of families I work with, we talk about like CCP when we're helping students. So and this is a way for parents, if you're listening, to talk to your teachers. If your kiddo's struggling, what is the I said it backwards, CPP, sorry. I am dyslexic. So content, process, and product. Right. So what is the content that's being delivered? Is it the history of war, or can we look at the role of women in World War I? Number two, what's the product that has to be created? Do we have to write a report, or could I do a diorama or record a podcast? And then three, what's the process to get there? Do I have to read this book, or can I listen to podcasts myself? Because that's way easier for me to learn. And when we look at these three domains, the C, P, and P, content, product, process, we start to let go of how we get places as much. And we start to focus on the depth and the complexity and the rigor and things. So I think this is incredibly helpful because we don't all take the same path. We don't all walk the same way. And to kind of go back to what you were saying before, as a society, we're so out of whack with what we're doing in school. Like we worship people who live off to the fringes, the Simone Biles, the Greta Thunbergs, the Elon Musks, etc., Bill Gates. We don't teach deep delving in school, right? And so I think that being able to help our kids have a different experience, a unique experience, offer more creativity and agency goes a long way.
And I I guess you understand, like we all understand that schooling's got to be standardized to some effect to actually, you've got a class of 30 kids, you've got to have some, I guess, level of medium. And I guess that this is changing the whole process of that, but it is offering, like you offer those students a different realm to go to. Do you get what I mean? So in a normal classroom, handling all those behaviours would be, not behaviours, all of those, 30 kids, and you've got kids up here and whatever. As a teacher, I did used to teach, and as a teacher, it's scary because there is so much out there, that is so many differences within your classroom. But this is great learning because I can see where you're going with, you offer them a different choice too around what they're doing. You don't have to do everything that's laid out that way in classroom. I mean, my son, he never read a book. He always looked it up on the internet. He interviewed people. He did it in a totally different way because, he can read, but it wasn't his thing to read books. So, and he's not neurodivergent, but it was just something he did that was different. And people would say to me, why are you letting him not read the book? And I said, well, as long as he's learning, it really doesn't matter to me. This is the most important thing. So in a sense, it's on a much greater scale than that, isn't it?
Yeah. At the end of the day, the content, process, product conversation is really about like what matters most. What are we here to make everyone follow the rules? Or are we here to help them learn and explore their own brain and figure out? Because that's what adulting is, right? It's a couple things, but one thing that adulting is being able to get results, right? If you're my boss and you say, I want this report on my desk, you might not care how I get there. You're probably too busy to pay attention. So whether I learned the stuff from YouTube or reading an article, as long as I'm doing my due diligence and fact checking and so forth, I don't think it matters so much. And so I think the opposite of what you mentioned, Kate, is what's happening to a lot of people is that we're teaching to the middle, and we leave out the kids on both ends a lot of the times, and it's really unfortunate because when I think of like slides, like like the translucent
Yes.
like slides in the class with the overhead, and when you lay over someone's trajectory in life with early interventions and early strength exploration and interest exploration, and you look at the difference in their life versus doing it later in life, it's exponential. And so if we can take young people who have great strengths and interests, like this country invested and gifted in people during the Cold War because we wanted to beat the Soviets, right? So we created, that's when gifted and talented programs really took off.
Right.
All of a sudden we were like, wow, actually curiosity and creativity and ingenuity are the way that we might win this conflict, right? This idea war. And it's unfortunate in some ways that we don't do that as much anymore. And I think that it's tough, as you say. I taught in a classroom in public school for some time. 30 is nothing in California. We have classes with like 42 kids here. And what do? You can still do what I'm talking about at scale. You can do it with many kids. It's harder to differentiate. You have to put kids in clusters, but you can do it. You can do a tic-tac-toe project where, you have to do 3 of these choices or whatever it might be. You pick any 3 of the 9. It can be done. And again, when we ask ourselves, what's the point of education? It used to be getting kids ready for factories. We're not an industrial country anymore, and I think most of the West is not. So what then must we do? Well, we are in an intellectual and curiosity-driven era, and education must keep up, and therefore we must cultivate curiosity, interest, independence, autonomy, all of these adulting skills that we require for our kids in the future. And it's just going to lead to them having this kind of outsized mosaic effect where each of them develop their own beautiful brilliance and identity, and it makes for a better collective beauty and identity, whether it's as a country or a state or a global civilization.
Wow. So do you go and talk to teachers and people? Like, you are obviously very, exceptional in that area of sharing your opinion, which is amazing. Do you actually do anything to do with education on a larger scale than you currently do? Do you get what I mean? Do you go and talk to teachers?
Yeah, I do talks all the time. I try to do a conference a month is sort of my goal. One or 2 either virtual or in-person conferences a month. So I just did a teacher training like 2 weeks ago, actually, and I have another one coming up.
Because not everyone.
And there's always pushback, and there's always people are like, that's tough, and I get it. But at the end of the day, what's the point? Are we just perpetuating? And I tell the story all the time. My mentor, Dr. Susan Baum, I just ran into her last week, so I shared this story with her. I'll tell you right now, quickly. I worked at the school, which was the first school to support twice exceptional students. It was called Bridges. It is called Bridges Academy, and I taught there for about 10 years. Then they started a research center, and then they founded a graduate school, and I went all the way up, and then I went out and started my own program. The joke is that Dr. Baum was really the first person in this field. She's one of the original founding people who was part of coining the term twice exceptional before it was called gifted and learning disabled.
Oh, okay.
And she would often praise me for the work that I was doing in everything but my job. I was a history teacher, and then I took on other things. I created a debate class. I made an automotive elective, and I created a senior course called Adulting, and it was about helping kids, do all these things. And she would always compliment me for every other class but history, and it drove me nuts. And I had this aha, like here's like one of the most important people in our field, and she's showering me with praise. And I had this like epic light bulb go off in my head once, and I went, oh my God, I never took any of these classes I'm teaching. I'm teaching them the way that I intuitively feel the kids need, but I had history teachers, and I'm probably teaching like them. So I had let go of what it looked like to be a debate coach or an adulting teacher or an automotive teacher, but I had held on to what it meant to be generationally a history teacher. And I was better at the other because it was intuitive, and Dr. Susan Baum coined this phrase, which I love. It's better to be a guide on the side than a sage on the stage. And I was supporting kids on the side and developing their unique interests and strengths and so forth versus coming down from like what I think a history teacher must be and how the kids need to operate in history class. And once I sort of had this like ego death, became a good educator.
And you taught history well? Did you change?
I think so.
Did you change your history?
I hope it got better.
Yeah.
I hope it got better.
And that's so interesting. And you are a very big picture thinker. You can feel it, you can hear it. So tell me, can you just give us an idea what it's like to be in an ADHD brain, and what your process was after being diagnosed, and whether you went on medication, and how did that medication help you? Like, what does it feel like? Because, when you're not there, you don't know.
Yeah, there's a saying that first came out in the autistic community, which is something to the effect of, once you met an autistic person, you've met an autistic person. So everybody's experience is different. ADHD is no different. ADHD is characterized, most people think that there's ADD and ADHD, but they're actually one and the same. There's just inattentive attention deficit, right? Which is like, I'm having difficulty focusing. And then there's hyperactive, which is going to be like over attentive. So I'm really excited and so forth. And so when, I can anecdotally share my experience, but I just always had a hard time sitting still. I had a difficult time focusing. I never liked to, at the earliest age, I remember my desk was always like up against the teacher's desk. I wasn't like a bad, quote unquote, I don't think there's ever any such thing as bad kids, by the way, but I wasn't like a troublemaker, but I would get in trouble because my brain was just bored. I couldn't focus on the things that we were doing, and it felt like I was being squeezed. So I would get up and do other things, and I would like create booby traps in the class, like out of Lego blocks and things that just felt like they were stimulating. Because at the end of the day, summing up ADHD, I guess, is that, according to like the medical model, there's different models of psychology, right? Behavioral psychology says that like we are a result of our conditioning and our environment. Humanistic is about growing up and self-actualizing. Psychodynamic is Freudian, right? It's our experiences when we're young. The medical model, the sort of biological model, looks at our brain and says, well, ADHD brains have lower dopamine levels. And it's sort of like a beach ball. We're just trying to kind of keep the thing up. So we do things that might be impulsive. We procrastinate. We might be a little bit scattered because we're looking for novelty all the time. And there's something like, I don't remember the statistic exactly, but it's like 40% of entrepreneurs and like 60% of CEOs or something like that. I might have the numbers backwards, but have ADHD. And it's because of that idea of like constantly chasing more and more. So I think an ADHD brain is, I think the meme or like the idea people have is like super scattered, like, oh, squirrel. And it can be that. But a lot of the times it's just about pursuing feelings, right? So ADHDers sometimes eat a lot or overeat when they're not hungry because food releases different neurotransmitters, right? So we are looking for things, or sometimes ADHDers are more predisposed to substance abuse, because, caffeine or alcohol or nicotine or whatever it might be is just, it's calming us down. And that's another interesting thing about the neurodivergent ADHD brain, is that there's kind of inverse reactors. So like stimulants, for example, can sometimes bring us down, whereas they might bring someone else up. So it was a very interesting journey for me. I had a difficult time. Have you seen The Matrix?
A long
Have you ever
time
seen
ago.
The Matrix?
A long time ago.
You know the famous scene where Morpheus gives like 2 pills, and he's like,
Yes.
You can take the blue pill and you can go back to sleep, and this was a dream, or you can take the red pill. I sort of felt like every day was like that. I was given medicine in 4th grade, and we decided I wasn't going to take it. My mom was worried about stimulants on a young adolescent, and so we decided I would not take it. I then started taking medicine in high school. And it was really difficult. I went through the gamut. I took Ritalin, Adderall, Vyvanse, Concerta, Strattera. I've taken most of the meds that are available. And it's tough. I used to describe it as a deal with the devil, right? I can pay attention today, but I will lose my sense of personality and humor and appetite. It was very difficult. It doesn't have to be so extreme, but I didn't understand that, throttling on and off different dosages. So I've experimented with that. I wrestled with that my whole life. Even today, I look at my calendar. I look at my calendar and I think, what do I have to do today? Is it worth, doing this, or should I kind of self-medicate? And my self-medication basically means like I try to go to the gym first thing in the morning, and then I'll drink some green tea during the day to try to calm me down a little bit. So it's a difficult thing, and it's very personal. There's stimulant medicines, there's non-stimulants. Stimulants can be taken when you want. Non-stimulants have to be rotated on and off. But it's definitely, if you have a good psychiatrist who can help you on the journey. Also, I think one of the most important things is understanding the comorbidities of these things. So people who have ADHD and autism are predisposed to have more anxiety and depression. So I didn't always understand that. Like I have ADHD, anxiety, and dyslexia. Oh, I got the thumbs up. And that means that those are all connected, right? I am anxious about my inability to produce as much as my mind thinks I'm capable of. And I suffer from great time blindness every day. And I teach this stuff and I've researched this stuff. I think that I can do more than I can. And it's difficult. I wake up and think, today's going to be different, because ADHDers have this kind of short blindness that in our rear view. And then I go to bed and I think, oh, I failed. And it's this kind of cycle that can be quite challenging. So I think understanding what you're getting into when you take medicine, but also understanding that there are these comorbidities and that sometimes medicines can exacerbate things. My focus medicine heightens my anxiety. Not taking it can help with other things, but it can harm with others. So it's a nuanced, complex thing. It's very personal. I recommend to anyone who's looking, do research before you go on to harder medicines. Maybe try some alternatives and see if it helps. Exercise, certain elimination diets, things like that you can always try and explore. At the end of the day, medicine there's no supplement is going to take place of a stimulant, for example, or if someone has, different psychotic challenges and so forth, like there is no stimulant or herbal thing that you can do that's going to be quite on the level with that, but it's a personal choice because you're putting a chemical in your body.
That's right. And it must be really hard for a parent to make that decision for a young person, because they're not in their body understanding what it does. And like you say, it negates the creativity sometimes, obviously.
It can. It's a trade-off. Yeah. I had a moment, kind of a low moment in college where I was walking across the quad in the center, and my roommate called out, "You took your medicine today." And this was like 50 feet away. He could tell just by my gait. By the way, he's a psychologist now, so he's exceptionally talented. But he could tell just based on my body language that I was medicated. Again, that's not to say that it doesn't have benefits or that every medicine is going to kill your creativity. Certainly that's not the case. I know kiddos who actually are able to access their creativity because their meds have lessened their anxiety so much that they don't have that fight or flight feeling all the time, and that they can actually be their best selves. So
yeah. So really, if you're listening,
complex.
Yeah. So really, if you're listening too, and you've got a child, you realize that there's not just one that will necessarily be the be all and end all. That it's really worth trialing them and listening to your kid, because you obviously know how it makes you feel. No one else is going to know that, are they? That's very important, because often we don't listen to children, in that sense. So have your ears switched on, because I know that one of the things that I see is that self-regulation can be quite difficult, in this area. I mean, self-regulation's a hard thing anyway. So how do you self-regulate, or how do you teach self-regulation for children who have ADHD?
It's complex. I mean, when we look at the neuroscience, you have neurodivergent brains, specifically twice exceptional, because this is the field that I'm most familiar in, or you could also use gifted data. So gifted or twice exceptional students have emotional epicenters. The amygdala, which is like the almond size. You have two of these amygdalae. They're like the almond size. I think of it like an airplane. You know how the cockpit is so small and the plane is so big? That's the ultimate control tower section there, right? So the amygdala is in charge of your limbic system, which is in charge of your emotional brain. That can be up to 70% larger in gifted kids. So not only is it larger, but it happens earlier. So you have this perfect storm of a kid who, we say like, get a hold of yourself. It's like they literally cannot. Like they're feeling huge experiences. And then you compound that with intelligence. You take a 10-year-old who understands the gravity of global warming, and then you tell them to go read their poems in class. Like, no, the sea level's rising. Like, we're not going to be safe, That's complex. And then these kids also have a more dense corpus callosum, which is that the bridge that goes between the left and right hemisphere. And that's what's connecting these quick synapses, these quick connections between that sort of logic and creativity, and they're firing way faster than kids their age. So emotional regulation is way out of whack for kids in general, right? That's what we don't expect our kids. They have meltdowns and it's part of their thing. Again, those brains develop back to front. So it's sort of safety and movement and emotion and then logic. So that's part of the continuum, but it's going to be longer with gifted kids and twice exceptional kids. And it's really up for us adults to scaffold emotional regulation in. Hey, I noticed that you are feeling this way. What has led to that, do you think? Or maybe after the fact we process. Doing things like logical things like counting and so forth can help, right? Square breathing. I'm going to inhale for 2 seconds, hold for 2 seconds, exhale for 2 seconds. Things like that can help because we throttle away from the emotional brain and into the logical brain. But at the end of the day, you have a brain that's developing way faster and way more asynchronously than for most. And that is going to come with a great deal of dysregulation and challenges.
That's a great explanation. Thank you very much for that. So overall, you've got this Young Scholars Academy. Tell us about it. What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm just going to add one thought to what I just said, and then I'll answer your question, which is that a lot of the times, with learning differences and neurodiversity, it's not visual. It's not something that we can always see, right? So if you see someone who's, for example, physically different than they're in a wheelchair, or someone who's visually impaired who has a stick, those are things that are clues to us that someone needs accommodations and support. And with people with learning differences and differently wired brains, it's not abundantly clear. When we look at someone, you don't know. So it becomes important to, I think, check our assumptions a great deal and sort of check in and see, are they experiencing this because they're lazy? You can't tell the difference between someone based on looks who is twice exceptional and has 165 IQ and someone who's neurotypical with a 100 IQ. So maybe pausing and reflecting and asking some questions, and again, building in that scaffolding for them is key. So I just wanted to kind of add that before I forget.
No, I agree with you. No, because part of our thing and part of a lot of the people who I speak to is get curious, because often we don't get curious about we have our own perception, our own ideas in our head, and we don't ask other people. So
absolutely. Yeah, it's a survival mechanism. We make quick assumptions, right? Is this a threat? Am I safe? Is this berry okay? Can I eat it? Right? These things keep us alive, but they also harm our judgments. So to your question, what's Young Scholars Academy? So we have, I founded, and a lot of people don't know this because my last name's Young, but it's called Young Scholars Academy. I founded this
you can pretend.
virtual, it is, by the way. I did that on purpose. But the thing is, my sort of moniker, I go by Mr. Sam. Mm-hmm. So people don't always know my last name. Anyway, right. Not the question, you asked it all. The Young Scholars Academy is a virtual enrichment village. So we offer courses, strength-based courses for kids from 5 to 18 years old. And the idea is largely the summation of everything that we talked today. We know the research is abundantly clear that neurodivergent, differently wired students are developing at different timelines, have different interests, and are struggling with different things. And they need to explore their interests and strengths with like-minded peers and mentors. So Young Scholars Academy offers different courses that kids can't usually access because they have these young ages and young bodies. So that ranges from, 5-year-olds taking philosophy or 7-year-olds taking engineering or robotics or debate. We have digital art and video game coding, Unity, using coding apps, whatever it might be. We have 35 different classes, as well as executive function, which is helping kids build the scaffolds for that frontal part of their brain that's developing. And the vision is this. It's that the kids come together for an hour a week, have wins, explore content they can't find anywhere else, find friends, and learn under mentors who are not going to say, oh, we're moving on to the next topic, but they'll go deep with these kids who crave depth and complexity. And it's a really beautiful space. The kids are taking 3 to 20 classes per week. Some of them are homeschooling or unschooling, and this is their whole entire social experience. Others are in public school or private school, and they're coming. We have several families in Australia as well. We're in 40 different states and 13 different countries, and it really is a special place. And another thing I'll just add quickly is that when families enroll, like when you go to a brick and mortar school, there's also like a homeroom club. So you take the classes that you sign up for, and you also get this free club where the kids are like sharing their passion. Someone's really interested in watercoloring, and she'll teach the other students, or someone else is really interested in like frogs, and we'll show them the terrarium. So it's really magical. And then for parents, every other week we have an expert come in and talk to the families. So we have a neuropsychologist coming next 2 weeks from now, talking about helping the kids understand their kids' brains and looking at brain scans. And then we have a lawyer coming, helping understand individualized education plans here in the United States. And so we can, better support our kids as a village. So it's a full wraparound enrichment program.
And it sounds amazing. And anyone listening that knows or might need this in their lives, please spread the word or join, because you just go online, don't you, and you're underneath that, and Sam's details will be in the show notes as well. So thank you, Sam. That was really enriching, and there's a lot of stuff that I have learned that I didn't know before, and I hope the same is for everyone who's listening, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for holding space for everybody. I appreciate you and your work.
Sam's journey as a neurodivergent educator and founder of Young Scholars Academy highlights the importance of understanding and embracing neurodiversity. Neurodivergent individuals whose neurological development diverges from the norm encompass conditions like ADHD, autism, and dyslexia. While these people may face unique challenges in learning, social interaction, and emotional regulation, many also possess exceptional strengths such as creativity and problem-solving abilities. For children, recognizing their unique learning style and being provided with tailored support can make a significant difference. Sam's vision emphasizes celebrating these differences and helping neurodivergent individuals navigate societal norms to discover their strengths and unique gifts. At the heart of Sam's message is a call for acceptance, support, and open-mindedness. By embracing neurodiversity and celebrating the strengths of all individuals, we can create a more inclusive and compassionate society for everyone. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who Is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.